Okay, will you please call attendance?
Okay, Canabla.
Yes.
Let's see now, Mr. Powell, John Powell. Here. Okay. Mr. Ruthway. Here. Mr. Bill. Here. Bill is here. Okay. And Ivan is here, President of the County Board.
I have a motion to accept the July 6th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Move that the meeting is accepted as submitted.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll allow public comment for 3 minutes per person. If anybody would like to speak, please state your name before you start talking. Okay, no comments tonight. Okay. All right, in last month's meeting, we identified that we were going to be talking about issues tonight. The first thing on the agenda, first issue on the agenda was setbacks.
Okay, Diane,
Yes.
I'd like to go on the record. It has been pointed out in previous discussions here at the Planning Commission and the Township Board that you have a conflict of interest in this deliberation of the zoning ordinance. For the township planning bylaws, it prohibits the person with a conflict of interest from deliberating and voting on such an issue. So I'd like to go on record to point that out. And also looking at the MTA guidelines. When I look at the MTA guidelines, it gives further direction on this issue. It says you should formally declare the conflict of interest. It doesn't require an in-depth explanation, but should be detailed enough to make clear the nature of the conflict. It should refrain from participating in any discussion or deliberations on the matter, such as offering information, responding to questions, or discussing requests as a commissioner, board member, or private citizen. It also says that members may not sit in the attendance while the matter is being discussed. So that's what's on page 171 of the MTA Township Guide on Planning and Zoning.
Mr. Powell, your comments are so noted. The Blissfield Township Board has already reviewed this issue. They've already talked with the township attorney, and they've talked with the Township Association attorney, all of whom have said that as a matter of course,
Okay.
I can sit on this committee.
Okay.
I can chair the committee. I can assist with this discussion.
Okay.
The question is whether I vote on it.
Okay.
I have already indicated and made verbal and made very publicly known the fact that I have clients as an attorney in town
Okay.
representing farmers who have interest in solar
Okay.
and farmers that do not have interest in solar and are opposed to it.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
How does that align with the bylaws of the Planning Commission when it talks about deliberation?
Right now, we are not, right now, we're in an information gathering
Okay.
perspective.
Okay.
I think that as an attorney, I have very clearly stated that my responsibilities sitting on the Blissfield Township Zoning and Planning Commission
Okay.
are to represent the members of the township, the residents of the township,
Okay.
And no one had a problem with this when we started with reviewing the master plan and the ordinances back in 2016, 2006.
Okay.
So, as I said, your comments are noted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to be talking about setbacks tonight. When I look at the township, the proposed ordinances, there was ordinance for solar that was put together by our township attorney as a draft, and the one that has been considered in the past here. And of course, I was not party to those discussions. When I look at the setback issues or setback requirements on page 4 of 8, I see that there is a 150 feet setback from the side or rear property line and a minimum of 100 feet from the nearest boundary of any road or highway right. Is there any discussion about that?
I think it's too much. I mean, we're talking about saving farmland, yet we want to have 150-foot setback as far, just, and that can use more space. And maybe 150 foot if there's a house right by it would be logical. But if there's no home here, I would say probably more than 50 foot would be plenty.
I'm really bad with distances. So how much is 150 feet? Can you give me a perspective?
Half
Half a football field, okay?
But that's from the center of the road, but they're saying from the back property line too. So.
Right. There, it's from the property line. I mean, the definition would be whether the property line starts at the center of the roadway or whether it starts at the ditch. And we'd have to define that, yes.
My question is, if you narrow it up, how are you going to maintain that property? Are you going to have weeds, grass? Most of these commercial sprayers run a 120-foot boom. How are you going to run a narrower strip than that?
John, I'll come back and answer your question.
Well, my question's related to that. John Tuckerman, Blissfield Township. I would like to know why you can plant a windbreak right on the line or build a fence right on the line, but you gotta have 150 feet over a setback for solar. Things should be consistent. Anybody that knows anything about planning knows that you need consistent setbacks for particular uses.
Okay, what is your name, sir?
Maury Denneker.
Okay,
We're talking about an industrial development. We're not talking about normal setbacks for tree lines or anything like that. This is what it is, industrial development. You can sugarcoat it all you want, that's what it is. You know, it's not a farm development, it's an industrial development.
okay. Mark?
Mark Knapple, Blissfield. I have a problem calling this an industrial development. Any industrial building or site I've seen, when it's no longer used, the building lays there in decay. The property, all the concrete. When this term is over, the posts will be pulled out, or we'd be right back to farming, another crop. I do not see this industrial at all.
Lynette Kulicki, as I stated back in June, you know, we all have our opinions whether it's industrial or farming, but the Michigan State has already come out and declared solar as an agricultural commodity. Yes, it has. It's written down that solar is an agricultural commodity.
for reference, I wanted to pull up the communication that I got from PA 116. Michigan Department of Agriculture. Dated July 20th, 2021. It was directed to me. Dear Ms. Canablo, on June 3, 2019, Governor Whitmer issued a policy statement to allow land currently enrolled in PA 116 to be used for commercial solar array purposes. MDARD was part of this policy review and determination and feels strongly that this policy meets several good land uses. As numerous energy plants are scheduled to be terminated over the next 10 years, long-term energy sources will continue to be forefront in Michigan. This policy statement allows farmers to be part of the solution in a voluntary way. This renewable energy source also allows for diversification of farm revenue and provides long-term economic sustainability of Michigan's farming community. It should be noted that active PA 116 lands participating in solar developments are not leaving the program. The remainder of the current agreements is added to the end of their solar agreement through a PA 116 agreement amendment. During the time land is in the solar agreement phase, landowners will not be eligible to receive the PA 116 tax credit. This amendment also provides for very specific management requirements and financial tools throughout the life of the solar agreement. This assures the land is properly returned to agricultural uses at the end of the solar agreement. I appreciate your interest in commercial solar panel development on PA 116 lands. If you have any further questions, please contact me. Yes.
I have here the application for the
I'm
solar.
sorry, can you please state your name?
Legally, you can't require that, but I'm more than happy to say my name
Thank
is
you.
Kevin Martis. Solar panel approval process through MDARD says if you apply to participate as a PA 116 landowner, you should contact the local unit of government having zoning authority to determine if solar is permitted on the land under local zoning. The following are possible responses that may be received. A, solar development is not permitted on the land. B, solar development may be permitted either through a rezone. It's clear, one of the options is that you do not have to permit this. Secondly, you referenced the 2006 master plan that you participated in creating, and I'm glad you brought that up. It says that, here's the Blissfield Township master plan. The township shall maintain the rural character and preserve the local characteristics that contribute to a viable, stable agriculture industry. It shall be the township's responsibility to encourage the retention of farmland in agricultural production. The township shall identify prime agricultural soils for concentration of farmland preservation efforts. The township shall discourage non-agricultural development of important farmland through the master land use plan and zoning map. Now you're going to say, well, solar is farming. Not according to the Blissfield Township zoning ordinance, which has a definition of farming, and that's any act regulated under the Right to Farm Act. Power plants, including solar, is not numbered among them. The real question is, and what is the right setback? The question is, why are we going to ignore our master plan? Or do you intend to amend it? And if so, how long are we going to spend on that? The leases were signed, presuming they were. Apparently at Palmyra, they say they've not been shown or seen any leases yet. If leases have been signed, it's for an act that's not currently legal in the township. The master plan gives you no reason to believe it should be lawful, no reason to expect it would ever become lawful, and the ordinance itself is silent on it. As a property owner in Blissfield Township, which has ag ground surrounding an investment property, I do not support converting some of the best farm ground in the state into utility-scale solar power plants.
Right. Mr. Martis, we must have conflicting copies of the Blissfield Township Master Plan, because what I can read, or what I am quoting here, is part of the agricultural goals section. township shall maintain the rural character and preserve the local characteristics that contribute to a viable, stable agricultural industry. It shall be the township's responsibility to encourage the retention of farmland and agricultural production and encourage new economic opportunities within the agricultural opportunity.
If I might, solar cannot be considered an agricultural opportunity because it's not mentioned in the Right to Farm Act. If your definition is going to be anything a farmer can do on their property that puts more money in their pockets, why are we going to limit only to solar? How about gas power plants? Somebody wants a 35-year lease for a gas power plant in Riga. That's temporary. When does this end? If ag preservation means just money into farmers' pockets, then why not subdivisions? Why not commercial? Why not industrial? This does not fit the definitions of agriculture in our old ordinance.
I really think, to say the least, alternative energy was in its infancy in 2006. And somebody made a comment to Jeff when they were talking about solar energy. Well, when you bought your farm, you weren't expecting to put solar on it. That's true. When my family bought the farm, they weren't expecting to have tractors either. All that was around was horse and buggy. And what are you going to do? Live in the past? Also, Mr. Marsh, you're in the construction business. And
This
once
is a
you build
personal
house
attack
on
and
a piece
is
of
inappropriate.
property,
Personal attack.
It is
Are you going to allow a personal attack, Diane?
farmland gone forever.
Are you going to allow a personal attack, Diane?
I
Mr.
pointed out a
Morris,
fact, not a personal attack.
Direct your comments to the chair, not to me.
Mr. Tuckerman, it is a well-known fact, I believe, public knowledge, Mr. Martis is in construction. So what was it was that you're trying to point out that once the farmland is gone in construction, it's
Yep,
gone. Is that
it's
your
gone.
point?
That's my point. Thank you.
And how does that compare with what we're proposing here with solar?
What we're proposing is a short-term thing that can easily be converted back to agriculture, and it's recognized by the state of Michigan. Was that clear?
Yes, you were. Thank you. Unless, Mr. Martis, you have another question?
Well, sure. We keep hearing that it's temporary, but the Township Planning Commission needs to understand this. Once that use is created on that property, we may decide that we didn't want to continue to have solar on that property. But even if you amend your ordinance, as long as most of that project remains in place, it can be upgraded and repaired in perpetuity, irrespective of what we do with our zoning. Secondly, if solar is our future, and that's what I keep hearing, it's the future, and we're going to power our state, why on earth would we tear out 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acres of solar 30 years from now if it's the future? It makes no sense. The truth is, nothing in our master plan suggests that for a generation or more, we're going to convert prime farm ground into a power plant.
I'd like to offer a rebuttal for that, just like John said. Back in 2006, we had no idea what solar energy was. Another 30 years, when they do decide to either look at the solar or whatever, who knows what our renewable energy is going to be. But one of the things that I'd like to say is I just had a friend that traveled out to Minnesota and out in that area. The farmers out there have lost every crop that they have because there's no water. Our land is drying up. Our farmland is drying up. If we don't do something to save our planet for our children and our grandchildren, there will be no farmland. There will be absolutely nothing. We need to take a step forward and go and see what we can for the future.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Craner. I'm a former elected official of Blissfield Township. And I guess my question is, why are we changing our master plan for an ordinance?
Are we?
Sounds like it to me. And that's the questions I've been getting from people coming in the office.
Are we changing the ordinance?
I didn't say changing the ordinance. I said
Changing the master plan.
Ordinance for the master plan.
Let's look at what the master plan actually says. The master plan directs us to preserve our rural community. When we start telling our farmers what crops they're going to plant and what they're going to do with their land, are we preserving our rural community?
No.
I think that's the bottom question that all of us have to ask. Are we changing, are we doing anything to preserve our rural community? Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff Healer. We talk about not being industry, we talk about development. I think the solar fits the farming community better than more houses in urban sprawl. And that's why we was trying to preserve our farmland in the first place, is to keep the urban sprawl from happening and contractors and developers buying large chunks of ground and building communities that once houses are built on 50 acres, 100 acres, or 1,000, I think somebody put some numbers together around Blissfield here, there's pretty close to 500 acres have gone into housing developments. Those houses will never be turned down or torn down, streets won't be tore up, sewer systems won't be ripped out to farm again. This solar has that opportunity, it says in the contract, it says by the state of Michigan under the P116 regulations that they have, that if that should step aside and not be solar operated anymore, it gets returned back to farmland. And if that is the case, and during those years, we want to clean up our rivers and our streams, that land's not going to be farmed, it's not going to have chemical on it, it's not going to have fertilizer spread on it, it's not going to be bare wind, ripped sand blowing across. And all of this farmland, if any farmer speaks up, will tell you that it's not all prime farmland. There's some of it is and some of it isn't. And if it goes idle for 20 years, 30 years, 35 years, that's great. As farmers, we have, over the years, maybe fed livestock, maybe put up a greenhouse, maybe done this or that to level out our income. And for the farmer, a little solar on part of his acreage would level out his income for them dips. Like Lynette said here, if you lose your crop, you still got that income coming in. So it fits in the farming community, and that is the place to put it.
Maureen?
You're still taking your land out of production for an extended period of time. A solar company approached me, gave me a contract, and right in the contract, it's plain as, worded very clearly, they could put gravel roads or anything at their discretion. Unless everybody's getting a different contract than I got, it's not, to turn it back into agriculture production, we'll see. We'll see, but it's worded right in the contract I got anyway.
Well, one of the things that you need to remember is that when a proposal comes in to the township offices, it has to come back before this committee again. There are all kinds of studies that are done, feasibility studies that are done before that project is ever approved by the township. Everybody understands that, right? So whether there are roads put in, or where the roads are put in, or how they're put in, all issues that come before this committee and before the township. Jeff?
I got one more comment to make that was made on the roads here. A few years ago, nobody was complaining, and they started drilling oil wells around here to see if they could hit oil. Nobody was upset about that. Nobody helped or complained about to come to the rescue of the farmers on the pipelines or the power line when it went through in the 50s, which I farmed around for since that time period. And now all of a sudden we're concerned about this. The oil well that was drilled across from my house, it went down to, I think, around 5,000 feet. They built a road out to that oil well. They put plastic down, they hauled the stone in, they got done, it didn't materialize, they hauled everything out. They took the asphalt up and everything else that come out of the ground, hauled it away, put the farm ground back on top. You would never, I defy you to tell me where that road was today. And it's right across the road from my house. And you cannot see it.
even in modern day, very, very recently, within probably the past year and a half. There was Treadwell Oil, had a working oil production field on Ida Center Road, just east of County Line. Okay? And it was pumping oil in there. They were also probably fracking because they were putting chemicals back into the ground. Well, after maybe 2 or 3 years of production, I don't know exactly why the production stopped. Maybe Dale Zorn had some intervention into that because of the porous ground underneath. Production stopped on that oil well. And if you go by there today, it's about 6 months after, you know, given winter and everything, you know, the climate and everything, you know, with the winter and everything setting in, within one growing season, that land is totally reclaimed, and it's in cabbage, you know. So it's right by IS Farms, right around the area on the north side of the road. And their fracking operation is actually on the, I believe, on the south side of the road. So just the land, and they had, you know, they had roads in there and drives, and this was a functioning oil well that was actually pumping oil, and probably fracturing as well. And that production ceased, and that land is in total production right now, totally reclaimed. I was surprised. I used to drive by there every day. So I was totally surprised that this land was growing and growing productively within one growing season. So.
One of the issues that we've talked about is PA 116 and the Michigan Department of Agriculture and their participation in this. They have endorsed solar energy, flat out. They're saying that it is an acceptable use of farm ground. They don't just stop there. They go on, and any ground that is in PA 116, they have control over. So they come back and they will tell these companies that want to put these solar arrays in what kind of vegetation they want planted. And it has to be vegetation that is specific to this location. They tell them exactly how this is going to be done. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
If I were to come in before the planning commission and say to you, I would like you to rewrite your zoning for the ag district to accommodate my use as a builder, I believe the first thing you want to know is, what do you intend to build and where? And then I would have to explain that. And I would come in with a detailed proposal of what I intend to build and where. To date, except some generalizations about maybe wanting 1,000 acres of solar development in Blissfield Township, we don't know if it's on John Tuckerman's ground. We don't know if it's on Jeff Ehlert's ground. We don't know if it's on Mark Canablo's ground. We don't know if it's west of the river. We don't know if it's west of the river or east of the river. We don't know if it's south of town or north of town. Are we really considering rewriting the zoning for our entire ag district with no clear proposal in front of us about what and where they intend to build? Consumers called, first of all, they called Deerfield the last week wanting to see our ordinance. So there's another developer working. Consumers wants 2,000 acres in Ogden. ESA has asked for somewhere between 100 and 300 megawatts, is somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 acres in Palmyra. NextEra wants 1,500 in Raisin Township. How many thousands of acres are we talking about? Where is it going to go here in Blissfield? Is it going to go around? Is it going to go around Mr. Is it going to go around Mr. Euclid's house or Mr. Powell's? Do we have any idea at all? Are there any maps, anything?
Mr. Martis, we've already said that before anybody can do anything, they have to bring a proposal back to us. If you wanted to build a house, would you go to an architect and have house plans drawn up before you knew that the zoning had been changed so that you could have a residence on it? Yes or no?
You're asking for a rezoning of an entire township with no plans?
No.
You gotta be kidding me.
Question.
Nobody comes in and asks for rezoning of an entire township.
Mr. Martis,
ESA came to Deerfield with a complete set of drawings, I can tell you that much.
Mr. Martis, I asked you a very specific question.
Right.
As a builder, would you go to an architect and have elaborate plans drawn up for a big house if you didn't know that your proposal or that your house could be placed on that property?
So we're saying we have no idea where anybody's gonna build anything here, so we're just gonna rezone the entire township?
No.
We have obvious stakeholders here. Do we know which of them are gonna actually get solar?
Mr. Martis, we're not talking about rezoning anything.
We're not changing the
Talking.
zoning ordinance?
We're talking about elaborating on the ordinance that we have to allow this use.
But that's not working about changing the ordinance.
It's not like we're rezoning all of the property.
You're not gonna amend the
No.
zoning to permit this?
I didn't say that.
I don't understand what you're
said we
saying.
are not rezoning the property. We are allowing a use, we're adding in another provision in the township ordinances. We are not changing our zoning.
So you're amending the zoning, but you're not changing the zoning?
We're amending our zoning ordinances. We're not amending the zoning on each parcel. If any solar company wants to come in and bring a proposal to us, provided that we have a zoning ordinance that will allow it, then we start considering what the implications are and what the pieces are to it. We have final say as a township as to whether or not it's going to be allowed in, yes or no.
Are you talking about through the special land use process, or are you talking about through this amendment now? Because I really don't understand what the difference.
I think until we get to the end of this process, we don't know.
Interesting.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cindy Winland, and I'm a professional planning consultant, and I'm here with ESA Solar, and I can explain how the planning process works for a zoning amendment.
Full disclosure, I'm zoning administrator in Deerfield Township, so I have some idea of how this works.
Nice to meet
No,
you.
Nice to meet you.
Village, I think it is,
But
isn't
I
it?
just wanted to explain that when we're having a discussion here, that we're discussing amending the text of the ordinance that, as the planning commission chair said, allows for a special use. So the text is, as opposed to a use by right where anybody can do anything, use by a special use permit then requires a separate application. And the reason that we don't know where the actual leases are and the actual solar farm will be anywhere is intended by law, so that it's fair to everybody. Because sometimes if you say, I want to rezone my property and I want to do this use that's allowed in this zone, either by special use permit or by right, people can be discriminated against, saying, well, they don't pay their taxes, or I don't like their brother-in-law, or whatever that might be. So it's intentional not to know where. The idea is to enable the use by special use permit. So zoning is set up that way on purpose, so there's no deception going on. It's just, that's the way it's supposed to work.
So you're on the behalf of ESA, you're not consulting for the township, is that correct?
That's correct, but I'm also
Thank you.
telling you from a lifetime experience of planning in Michigan and being one of the authors of the existing law, that this is the way it works. It's intended to work this way. So it might feel convoluted, but it's supposed to be talking about the text, and then an individual application can come in after the fact, and that would be for a special use permit.
Okay. I would just say that that's interesting, because when I was on the planning commission in Riga, Exelon came in with a proposal of how many turbines they wanted to build, and in most townships where I've been involved, and they come in with a complete site plan at the same time that they're pushing for the text amendments. So it's contrary to my experience, but thank you for that.
When I went back and looked at setbacks, because our township ordinances do deal with a lot of setback requirements. When you look at billboard signs, they have to be at least 500 feet from any residential zoning district or residential use. And they have to be 50 feet off of the roadway. We have requirements for how far away from a lot line a building has to be. And we know that people have to come in and they have to apply for variances if in fact they want anything different. How many people in here have never asked for a variance before? Okay? How many people have asked for a variance? Have there been people that have asked for variances? And why do you do that? So that you can be an exception to the rule. So when we talk about setbacks, our setbacks are anywhere from 50 feet to 500 feet, depending upon the purpose. So let me ask some very specific questions. If there was a solar array that was proposed, this is hypothetical, solar arrays proposed across two fields, two different owners, would you require a setback between those two fields, between the two owners?
No.
They're both participants in the project or not?
Yes.
It would be reasonable not to do so there.
Okay, so then how far, so there, it's all a contiguous project, an array. So how far should the setback be from the roadway?
300 feet, minimum. That gets it past my property going to the north.
Oh, no, wait a second, I'm not talking about from a house, I'm talking about from a roadway. I'm making a distinction. What's the setback from a roadway? Not from a house.
What's the setback of a cornfield?
I would think 50, 75 feet would be plenty.
Okay?
You already got road right of way that goes back beyond the edge of the road. And then if you add 50 feet to that, you're almost, what, 75 feet off the road anyway, 70, at least 75 feet.
35 foot, 40 foot from the road from Summers to the road.
Right, so both sides of the road, you're taking up, what, 100 and some odd feet. If you frontage on the road, if the solar panels were across the road from you on a bare field, you'd still be 100, at least 150 feet or more from that solar panel. If it was in your front yard across the road, not your side yard. Over here, 300 feet from him, there's no solar panels going by him because between his and the other houses along the road, can't happen because there's nothing left. If you go 300 feet this way and 300 feet this way, there's no farmland in there.
So it's what's,
You gotta consider that type of stuff too, the location of the houses.
okay, so that's something that we would be able to determine coming in and looking at the project that was brought to us. Would I expect that I would ever have, I mean, what, if I was going to be looking at a project, how far away would you want your house? And I know that people have said to me, well, I moved out in the country to have that open field. But you own a lot. And it has boundaries. Yes, Maury.
But you make a very good point. They came out to the country to look at the open fields. If they looked at the zoning ordinance that were in place, they said, it's gonna remain this way. It's ag, it's gonna remain this way. They never thought it was gonna be developed 100 foot or 50 foot or whatever you guys decide from their property line. I sold houses off on farms. And, I talked to these people, do you really want a development, close to your property? And the answer is no. I came out here to look at ag. I come out and look at the farming. We enjoy that. We do not want to look at solar panels.
Do you
Now,
have-
maybe the other people in the township feel different, but that's what I've been told.
Okay. Do you have any guarantee?
Looking at your master plan, you certainly have a reasonable expectation.
No. Hang
Yeah.
tight just a second, Mr. Martis. If you buy a lot out in the country and the lot is defined, how much do you have control over?
Well, you got a very good point there. They thought they were guaranteed because they thought PA 116 protected the ag from development, which it doesn't. Now the PA 116 land's being used for development. They looked at it and said, I know I'm safe here. I know this land's in PA 116, these guys are in ag. I know I'm covered. Now you take it out of PA 116 and you allow it to be used for solar development.
Okay, but does that mean that if you buy a lot out in the country with a house on it, that you have a right to that wide open landscape?
That was their understanding when they moved out there.
That's not what my question was. Do you have a right to going across, to the view across someone else's land?
No.
What if they build a house there,
What if they build a house there,
right next door to you?
right next door?
You can't do that in PA 116, you can't develop unless it's for the farmer himself.
P 116
You can't
isn't
change
for
the taxes
perpetuity
and go
either.
for it.
I think the issue is that you can pull the ground out of PA 116 and pay 7 years of back taxes.
That's right.
And then you can have it zoned however you want, or at least apply to have it zoned however you want.
If you want that, you can even buy 20 acres.
The only way I see to come to any consensus, there will never be a consensus on setbacks. There never will be. The people that stand to profit at a very high rate are going to always want very small setbacks. The people who believed our master plan that said you not expect power plant development around your property are going to want big setbacks. Deerfield and Riga came up with the only solution that I can see that makes sense, very large setbacks
Okay, Mr. Martis,
that are subject to a
Mr. Martis,
waiver.
we're talking about Blissfield Township. We're not talking about Deerfield.
We're not.
talking about Riga, okay?
Do I have the floor or not?
Ask the question, no, because we're talking about Blissfield Township. The question is, if we're going to look at setbacks, what is a reasonable setback from the road? We're going to parse this out so that we can come to some resolution, because I don't know about you guys, but I need some help figuring this out. And I want something that all of us are going to be able to agree to at the end of the day. Yes?
Paula Green, I live in Ricker Highway. I believe Mr. Martis was trying to offer what he felt was a reasonable explanation of setbacks by comparing it to Riga Township.
If you don't want me to mention those townships, I'll say some other communities may have once upon a time done a 500-foot setback to a property line with the ability for the developer to negotiate a waiver from the neighboring landowner. That way, if that neighboring landowner is content to have much smaller setbacks, they can sign an easement with the developer. If not, they'll have bigger protections.
Okay.
That's the only fair solution I've ever seen on this issue.
Very well said, Mr. Martis. Mr. Deniker, do you want to have a landowner that has property right next to you come back to you and say, you know, I want to build something here and I want your permission to do something, but if you don't agree, I can't do it? Let me flip that around. As a farmer, you want to put up a building or do something out on your property, and you're being required to go to a landowner next to you and get their permission?
This is two different things. Me building a building or putting a solar development in is two totally different. They don't compare to one another. Don't give me that. They don't compare to one another. Don't put a false scenario in front of us.
I'm not sure that that's so far off the beaten track. Mr. Canavalo.
Buildings or not, I don't see why the neighboring parcel owner should have control over my property. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yes.
Madam Chairperson, I might remind you that you had opened the floor for public comment
Yes,
at the beginning of the meeting, and nobody spoke.
yes, that's true, I
Okay.
did.
I'm sorry, Jim Isley, Palomar Township. I came here to hear a discussion amongst the board members. Okay? Not a debate back and forth from one side to the other. I want to hear what you 5 people have to say. I'd also like to remind you, as chairperson of this meeting, you have the right to ask anybody who is keeping this meeting off track, you have the right to ask them to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Isley.
Keith Phillips.
Keith,
These 5 people are supposed to be representing the people of Blissfield Township. And if the people of Blissfield Township don't have the right to ask these questions and engage in conversation, then that's not right either.
Mr. Isley.
As a reminder, good point, Keith. Yes, okay, good point, okay? But everybody's had the opportunity to approach these 5 people. They all, I think, all live in the community, all right? And they probably have their names on the Blissfield Township website. We've all had a lot of opportunity to go to them, voice our opinion before this meeting. Let's let them do their job.
I would just point out that the chair keeps asking questions of the audience.
I do. And part of that is because I want input from residents of the township. Okay, so, back to setbacks. If we have a setback from the roadway, no houses involved, what's a reasonable setback? I'm directing this to the committee.
One for about 3 foot.
She's recusing.
I think the normal building setbacks for buildings, if they're doing normal building, which is, I think, 70 feet or 50 feet. And then we don't have to change anything, our normal
Where's that?
setback. I think there's a chart. For building.
It's section 4.07, schedule of regulations.
It's missing from that.
Yep. Rural residential's, the front is 50, the side is 50, the total side is, or the lease side is 25, the total side is 50, and the rear is 25. minimum yard setbacks. Well, yeah, I think 50 is too little. I think 50 is too
Is
little.
that from the center road or is that from the?
Well, these are minimum yard setbacks. So this would be from a house. And then the maximum building height is 2.5 stories or 35 feet.
That's the next question.
Yep, that's the next issue. So again, the question ends up being, what kind of setback?
Just be from the road. That's all we're considering
That-
at the present time.
Yep, that's right, from the road.
Center of the road.
Okay. So we're doing the 75?
Yeah.
75 from the center of the road?
And we define what the measurement was, but this is the copy I have, I thought we defined how you measure it. Page 4A, at least that's what I see. It drops over, so I have 12/16/2020.
Okay, you're looking at the draft, okay.
Yeah, probably I agree.
Yeah, it says, the draft that we have says, any measurement for solar farm setback shall use the property lot line or the nearest boundary of any road or highway right-of-way and not the center of the most immediate public road or highway.
That's in the draft.
That's in the draft.
So if we wanted to go to the center of the road, then we'd have to mix up.
I think that's the easiest way of measuring.
Well, and the concern that I have is any surveys that are done are always going to be from the middle of the road. They're always going to tell you where that boundary line is. So if we say 70 feet from the boundary line, it's going to be 75 feet from the boundary line as defined by the survey.
Survey markers on your property.
So what so you're saying that we have here, since Thomas Jefferson.
This is a
I understand
draft.
it's a draft,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
a
that's what
draft.
we're working, that's what we were
Yeah,
working on.
the problem is the survey always tells you where that boundary line is. Usually they go from the center of the roadway. They don't go from the side, the side of the road. So if we want to be very specific about where this is, yeah, consistency. We say from the center of the roadway, and then everybody knows what that is.
May I interject
Yes.
something? If you, in our community, we have large ditches and roads. Very often,
Yeah.
when there's a ditch along the road, the center of the right-of-way is measured on the edge of the road between the ditch and the road. Also, the McNick Act, which is, I can't tell you, it's 71, somewhere in there, it allowed for the county road commissions to take more than 66 feet, so you're all over the board there.
That's true.
I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Appreciate it.
That is true. And you've got some big drains out there and some ditches that are deep and wide.
So by doing it consistently from the edge of the road, then you're consistent in all things, is what you're saying. That's what we're.
But people that want to set back, if you, it could be right up to that edge of that ditch, then it's,
That's true.
and you wouldn't want that. But you want space for shrubbery or whatever they're gonna put, so to, cover the extent of the panels.
Okay, so here, the ditch is a 33-foot right away also.
It's a buffer.
It's 50 feet, okay, 33 or 50 feet. I'm not going to dispute either side, but they have a right of way next to their ditch.
The county drain first.
From the
The county drain from the
edge of the road.
no, from the center of the
Well,
drain.
center of the drain.
For
Center of the
cleaning
drain.
purposes, you have to stay back that far for anything.
From the edge of the road or from the center?
Center of the drain.
Center of the drain. Oh, so it's the center of the drain.
That's their access to clean ditches.
I got you, so they would pile their dirt and all that.
And move equipment.
So if they already have a right of way that's 50 feet from the center of the drain,
That would be redundant. They have two setbacks.
so it would be consistent with what is already there for the drain commission.
Yeah, usually it's 50 feet from the edge of a county drain. Now, a road ditch that the road commission built, that's not a county drain. Might be used for drainage, but it's got different rules.
So it looks like we need alternative language here.
County drain, if you from the center of the road, if it's county drain, from the center of the drain.
What do you think? Does that make sense?
I was trying to get that straight. If we have two different definitions of starting points.
Okay, so a drain would be 50 feet from the center of the drain,
I believe it's the edge.
from the edge?
It is.
Showed our house, it was the edge.
Yep, thanks,
Okay.
Nancy.
All right. So that's a drain. And then if it's a ditch,
It's the same thing.
50 feet from the center of the roadway?
Is it the same thing?
It's the same for us.
No.
What's that sound for the road ditch is the county drain? For the county or for the drain commission?
I missed that.
Well,
Nancy?
Nancy and I are just on the sidebar. She said that it was 50 feet for the ditch through the county planning commission as well as it was for the county drain commission. But I don't know if the road commission makes you stay 50 feet away with things like for the same reason the county drain commission does.
Okay, I tell you what, I will go back to the road commission and the drain commission and find what those easement areas are, drains and the ditches. Okay? So the question will be whether it's center, where they're measuring it from, okay? All right, so what about, okay, so that's a roadway. What about a house? How far away do we have any of these panels from a house?
Well, and C, we have the non-participation setbacks, right? Residential property owners not participating in a solar farm lease agreement and are entitled to a 150-foot setback along their property lines.
Which is half the size of a football field, right?
If they're not participating.
If they're not participating.
That's what is in the map.
We already discussed that.
We can discuss that amongst ourselves if it's too much or.
Is that, is, yeah, is that enough? Is it too much? Don?
You want room for enough good landscaping that what they see is nice landscaping.
Well, it's a buffer.
That's a buffer, right?
Well, I've seen other ordinances using much larger values.
I saw some 300. And I saw one in 30.
30 didn't use a participation clause, though, did it?
That's true.
Okay, so the participation clause, if we're gonna use it, then it needs to reflect the value that provides that buffer. So I think it should be larger than 150 feet. And it can always be reduced. When we talked back in October last year, and we talked 300 to 500 feet, what I remember discussing.
For houses next to it.
Yeah. And putting this participation setback in there to provide that barrier between non-participant.
Anything greater than 300, anything, for a lot line abutting, a lot that does not participate in the solar project and is either under 5 acres and/or contains residential dwelling unit. Minimum setback shall be 200. And then Macon, which has, I think they're in the process of getting solar, has greater than 100 for large solar farm, solar arrays, other structures located at least 100 feet from all existing R1 single family, R2 single family. So they're 100, that's in 100, 200, 300.
Take your pick.
I think there are even larger ones than that. What's that?
I said I thought when we were doing our research
Yeah.
last year.
We said 500 feet. That's what I said. That's what we discussed back before, 500 feet.
Football field. Okay.
Two.
Two football fields. Yes.
We discussed.
So we're looking at, what do you think? 500? 250, 500?
That's
Probably from here to all, it's probably 50 feet.
So probably out there to that white fence is going to be
And always reduce it.
250?
Always reduce it. That's right. Always be reduced.
What is going to happen to the ground that's not used between that and the house? I mean, who's going to be responsible for taking care of that area?
That's a
That would
good
be
question.
part of the contract, right, between.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. Sue?
I just wanted to make the statement, if you create a regulation with a distance, that it can't always be reduced. The only way to reduce it would be to ask for a variance. The variance would have to have a justifiable reason. And so when you think about a setback, it should be a setback that you intend to live with indefinitely. And if you also look at the setbacks you have in ordinance right now, there are things like salvage yards that only have 50-foot setbacks from a neighboring property with a house or without a house. So just to add some context to the discussion, but I wouldn't write a regulation that relied on a variance to change it.
You know, Ovid did the same thing they use, I got it pulled up here. And the lot line should be abutting the lot is not participating in a solar project and is either under 5 acres or contains a residential dwelling adjacent to no more than 2 lot lines. For a given participating parcel, the minimum setback should be 200 feet. For all other lot lines and non-participating parcel setback should be 1,000 feet. These setbacks shall not apply across public rights of way.
Yeah, see, and I'm looking at Raven, it says 100 feet.
Public or private roadway 50 feet. Residential dwelling, pool for solar farm, 500 feet from the nearest corner of the dwelling unit. Setback requires shall apply across public right of ways.
So I think 500 is too far. Again, if you're looking at what's going to happen with that.
I think 500
Okay.
is appropriate.
If you're looking at what's going to happen to that land between the dwelling,
It can always be changed.
well, one of the things that we started out with the ordinances was that we would have 0 variances. We were always going to say no variances, that was it. And there are variances that we know are now being allowed. If we say 250, and a homeowner comes back in, and because of the way the house is sitting and because of the environment, the homeowner believes that it should be out further, they could come in, because the landowners are always, the people that reside in that area are always going to be invited to come in and participate as well. They could come in and say, no, we want more.
I want to go with what we talked about back in October before you were part of this conversation. 500 is what we talked about. That's what I'd like to stick with.
Okay.
Yeah, but when we wrote this up, I remember discussing it.
Yes, I know that.
We didn't agree to that.
I agree, I know that we didn't agree with it. I'm not saying we did.
Okay. Well,
All right, so the question is, where do we go with it? A minimum of 150. Currently says
Well, I could go
150
and
feet.
compromise and say 300 feet. I think that's fair, and that's a compromise. Yeah, 115, 300. That's more than sufficient. That's
Okay.
a football field. And, you know, and if they did it, then you've got your landscaping beyond that.
Okay.
And that, you're almost getting up to that probably anyways. You know,
The residence is completely surrounded. So in other words, it's a sole residence out there, greater than 500 acres, should it consider be special consideration. So Ovid considered that under special consideration. I'm just asking.
You know,
Would
I
that-
don't know, that's probably a good point.
Would that
I
be
just wonder how
considered?
many.
Would that be considered in looking at the plan when it's brought to us?
Yeah, if they're gonna go around the house.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they're going to, because usually those are square blocks.
Yeah, 300-foot setback, and then you have your landscaping beyond that. You can probably put 43 anyway.
What do you think?
I think when we wrote this, we were looking at 150 feet. And probably the majority of this is going to be along 3, that's going to be along 3 sides. 2 sides and the middle. And probably the majority of the cases. And, we read 150 feet, we wrote it. still think that's quite a substantial distance. It would be at least the length of this hall.
And this is for residents,
Yeah, for residential, non-participant.
non-participation. What about minimums that are all 75 foot?
You know, what we're discussing.
Yes.
75 foot,
Yeah, if I just mention that.
right. What do you think?
When we wrote that stuff back a year ago, there was a lot of things we didn't know. And I'm kind of sure that there's still a lot of things that I don't. But I feel like I'm tasked to come up with something that's fair and equitable. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't have a position for or against, but we talked about 150 and 500 feet, so I agree that whoever suggested 300 feet is a good compromise. I agree with that.
So we have 500, we have 300, we have 150, we have, what are you doing, boss? You. Come on.
You're 500, right?
I agree with Jim, I said 300 feet.
Oh,
okay.
I thought it was agreeable, and I thought Bill was agreeable
Yeah.
with the 300 feet.
Okay.
so.
What's
Do
gonna
we
happen
need
to
a
that
motion?
300
Do we
feet?
need a motion for that?
Can we, well,
To settle that?
okay, do we have a motion for the setback from a house?
Is that at the property line or is it
Pro-
the house?
From the
Property
house?
line.
Oh, from the property
Property
line?
line.
Yeah, property line of the non-participating
Right.
residents.
Do I need that property line and non-participating resident be set at 300 foot?
May I ask a question? Are we gonna have shoulder belts? Landscaping?
That's down on the agenda.
Yes.
Of course. That's what I said, by the time you have that, you probably got 500.
You're talking about buffer zones.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If we're gonna put plant trees along
Yeah,
the
we're gonna have
edge,
landscaping.
why do we need 300 feet on the inside of that when they won't see past the trees anyway?
And what is a farmer that has it on his farm, and there's a house there, it's a non-participating house, of course, but the farmer is, what's he gonna do with that 300 feet? You gonna let it grow up the weeds?
Farming.
Maybe you don't want to farm it. Maybe he might just get upset at that neighbor, or one of you people might be his neighbor, that, so I just let it grow up the weeds. Suppose he says that. Any different than, suppose he decides in that 300 feet to build a cattle barn. He has the right to Farm Act to do that. You have to take his considerations and his thoughts into consideration.
Right, Dennis. Nobody wants a big setback and then a bunch of weeds. I think we can all agree there, but I don't know how this lease works. Maybe somebody can enlighten me. If I've got a chunk of ground, say I have 500 acres and I sign it up and I lease it, it's no longer my responsibility, it's the leaseholder that needs to deal with it, right? So as a farmer, if I had 500 acres and I leased it to somebody, I have ground I lease to farm and they manage what they lease. So I'm just curious of who owns that?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Hey, I'm Matt from ESA Solar. So you actually, if we don't use ground, for whatever reason that is, it's up to the farmer to do what he wants with that land. We could not use an entire, we could only use 50 acres out of a 100-acre piece, and he could be up to, or she could be up to farm that 50-acre piece. It's up to them. We lease the ground that is around, basically within the fence line. And anything outside the fence line is going to be, obviously, whatever they want to do with it still.
So you're telling me, say someone has 100 acres you want to put solar on, and we have a setback, and you lease the whole 100 acres, you're telling them, that's your responsibility now? I don't think so. I think if we're going to write this ordinance, you're going to be responsible for what you lease. If you're
Right.
not,
Right.
I
So
don't think they're
there's
gonna do it.
right, I agree with what you're saying. We wouldn't go to the township with like a plan that said we're leasing 100 acres of this and then not use the 100 acres.
That's what I'm,
But what I'm saying, the lease is different than the actual permit process, right? 'Cause the
If
actual
you
site
bring a
plan
permit
is
process here,
different.
we see there's 150 feet here. So you've got to have 150 feet of landscaping. And we asked you, what are you going to do with that other end? You're going to tell us you're not worried about that because we're not going to do anything?
No, I'm saying that it's the farmer's right or the landowner's right to do what they want with that land. Now, if they would like to us maintain it, we certainly will.
Okay. So Jeff, your thing is, if you lease it to them, you lease the whole thing and tell them, yeah, you want to take care of it.
Well, that's what you would hope to do,
Well,
but if it didn't turn out that way, and you've got 300 feet or whatever you decide, a lot of townships have so many foot of road frontage. So you could sell that strip off next to that guy's house that wanted 300 feet or 500 feet, and build a house there. That would be permissible. And then what are you gonna do, because that's okay?
Yeah, 300 feet's enough to put a building house.
And the gentleman back
There you go,
there,
Marcus.
the contractor, would more than happily build that house there for you.
Yes.
I'd like to invite anyone on the committee to pick several non-participating households that are affected and go and stand in their front yard, their backyard, and look at the 150-foot, 300-foot, 500-foot setback, and picture that as your home before you make that decision.
I already have. I know where my lot line is, and I've kind of taken that responsibility already too.
Mr. Martis?
To the point of whether somebody could build a house in that 300-foot setback, they could not because they would create a non-conforming use because it wouldn't comply with the setback standards anymore, so you could not do that. Secondly, as much as you object to this idea of a waiver, if you're writing a setback distance to a participant that's different than a non-participant, you have an implicit waiver. It's already existing because if ESA wants to build closer to the neighbor, they just go sign some kind of agreement with them and they become a participant and they get a much smaller setback. So what's happening, whether you call it a waiver or not, the second you make that distinction between the two, which is why, as I said earlier, a large setback to non-participants and a small setback to participants with the option for the developer to acquire a smaller setback by making them a participant. Then nobody's basically donating their rural way of life to the neighbor's tenant. They can negotiate a fair value on their loss of amenity.
Thank you, Mr. Martis. And that is true. So ESA would have another decision to make. All right, so 150 for non-participants, or for participants, and 300 for non-participants? Okay, all right. And then I will go back to the road commission and the drain commission.
Yeah, 'cause we need that.
Yep, and get the rest of that information. Okay, let's talk about solar panel heights. In the proposal, or in the draft, it's 12 feet. Would somebody from ESA talk to me about those panels? How big are those panels?
Sure. So panels are typically 4x8, 3-5, just depends on the actual panel itself. They sit on, piles of steel posts that goes into the ground, and then there's an access bar and a racking system where you actually put the panel itself. In almost every type of system that would be proposed in this area of the state, it's going to be a single axis tracker, so it'd be tracking the sun throughout the day. So they slowly move about every 5 minutes to track the sun and adjust for the sunlight. In the center access of where they sit flat, so like at night they sit flat, that's generally about 6 foot, right? And so when they're at the when they're tilted, say at sunrise or sunset, you'd be about 24 inches off the ground, 2 foot off the ground. At the very max tip height, it's kind of, it depends on the topography, to be honest with you. So generally they're about 10 foot at the max tilt height. Again, that's only at the beginning or some parts of the day, but when you have different topographic features, you need some adjustments for room that, you know, for some reason you need to just elevate that a little bit more. So there might be a little section or a small array that would actually be maybe a little bit more than 10 foot. Typically, it could get into 12 foot, but not much higher than that. Now, there is systems out there that you'd see in the state of Michigan for smaller systems. So the legislator's putting together this bill that is for community solar, right? Community solar is for communities like Blissfield or anywhere around Michigan to pay into or subscribe to receiving renewable energy based off a system that's kind of nearby. And so that's 1 to 5 megawatts. That's typically what community solar is. And you're seeing those be a little bit higher, right? Because if there are higher, you get more output, right? It's either versus a 1-panel system, you have a 2-panel system. So it's got 2 portraits. So you have, instead of 1, you have 2 kind of stacked up on top of each other. There is a handful of those around the state of Michigan now, and they're actually more like 17 foot. But again, it's just that one part of the day where they actually sit high. So when you're creating an ordinance, it wouldn't just be for a large-scale solar farm, or there's actually, you know, small-scale solar farm. If you want to do a 20-acre piece, typically, well, not typically, it's common to see larger panels or larger heights.
Where is technology trending now? And where you are obviously in competition with a lot of other solar panel companies. And where is the technology trending now? Is it trending towards smaller, more efficient units? Because you are going to have to be in competition with, well, to get your systems placed.
Yes.
Is this a competitive point to be able to scale down the size, not only to increase the efficiency of your panels, but also to scale down the size of them?
Only for the solar panel manufacturer, right? So the builder, the developer, the operator, they're just using whatever panels that was purchased during the construction process. So where technology is changing is they're having from, I think, my solar panels in my house are, what are they, 330 watts? And then what you're seeing now is 600 watts. So the exact same looking panel, you couldn't tell the difference between the two, but one produces double the power than the other. So it's really not a different system. The reason why you put different systems in is for because of the soils and maybe some sort of graphic features. Say it's a little bit more hilly, or it's just a little bit more bumpy. You'd want a bigger pile and just stand it up a little higher, and then that's why you put a 2-portrait system in. Doesn't have anything to do with higher wattage or higher output. More of that you can fit more output in a smaller space.
And decrease the amount of acreage that's being
Yes.
consumed.
And now the panels produce both sides. So then what you're doing is you're not only doing the panels more efficient, but you get extra production because you can produce on the back of the panel.
My question is, when you have trees that are planted between a non-participant, does it really make any difference what the height is? Because there's going to be landscaping that's going to cover it.
Well, we wouldn't plant trees or shrubs where you have any shading. So example, we couldn't install a solar system that's next to a radio tower, right? Because then you have shading. It's basically, we have to stay away from shading, right? So you'd have to plant the trees just far enough back. I think it's 2.5 times the height of the actual structure. So if it has, a 10-foot tall tree, you have to be 25 foot from that tree to not be shaded by that tree.
So what happens over time when those trees grow?
Well, you know the maturity of the tree when you plant. If you do the setback prior.
You got a 10-foot tree now. Oh, you ain't getting those. Well, I guess you're not gonna get a 10-foot tree now, but So you plan that distance for the growth of the tree?
You choose the tree that grows to the height that you want. So basically, for example, here that you are doing cypresses on most of the houses, you will choose a cypress that doesn't grow that tall, and you are maintaining it, right? So you're gonna get the opacity that you want and also the height.
Or even like a blue spruce that goes to like 40 foot, I mean, you'd be 120 foot from that tree. The trees go typically on the property line or near the property line of the non-participating house, right? Because that way you're blocking, the whole point of the trees is to block a view, right? Or to block the view of the solar array. So the closer you put it to.
So you need 140 foot.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have that big of a width of a tree, but you want to plant it near the property line so that there is a, you know, a buffer and a screen versus, you know, next to the system where you have shading and less of a screen.
When we look at alternatives for the height in other ordinances,
Discuss it before we can talk about
what was the basis for your 12-foot before? Since I wasn't participating.
We made a field visit to a facility in Bowling Green, solar array in Bowling Green. And they had single racking systems that I believe are at maximum height was 7 feet, is that right, Don?
I don't remember the exact value, but you're right on track. That's where we got the number from.
So we were up close and personal.
And that's what they said was the max height that they needed, and that's what we utilized. If I'm not correcting it right, that's usually what you were saying. Right. That's where we got the value from.
Okay. I guess, what I heard you say is that 12-foot is something that you can live with.
Generally, for the project that you'd be looking to do in this area of the state, yes.
No,
Not
they were
for
part of
every
that
project.
conversation when we said that 12 feet out. So they were part of that conversation. So
Okay.
they were,
All right, everybody's in agreement, 12 foot?
yeah.
Okay. Have a motion?
Motion for 12-foot maximum height.
All in favor? Okay, let's talk about noise levels. It's 8:35, how much longer do you want to go tonight?
Depends on how quickly we can go to the agreement on this, that's what I'll say.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to continue until 9 o'clock. Okay, noise levels. According to what we have in the draft in paragraph 7, ambient sound pressure levels shall be measured at the property line of a solar farm and shall not exceed 40 decibels.
You know, since that time, since we wrote that map, I actually found in Macon Township, I believe, Macon Township's ordinance on noise, which is the other Macon Township's ordinance, it would be on page 2, number 6. It seems like rather than setting one level, it would make sense, as what Macon did. They gave different decibel tolerances considering different situations. You have that understood?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, what it says is 50 decibels is measured at the property line of any adjacent R1 single-family residential, what?
Yeah, for residential, yeah.
And then 45 as measured at any neighboring residence in existence at the time the solar farm is granted its special use land approval, between the hours of 9 and 7. 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.
Yeah, because the solar panels aren't running there, that
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
Rather than just setting one indiscriminate level.
60 decibels is measured at the lot lines of the project boundary.
So you have 50 if it borders the residence, 45 at night, and 60, you know, if you have vacant land. And that way, you know, if they wish to develop that, they could put their transformers in the location that would comply to what the, you know, to the most optimal location that would comply to the specifications set forth. Rather than just setting one indiscriminate level, you know, 40, 60 decibels is this, 50 is this. Yeah. This way it's something that's more practical, considering that, you know, at night they're not running anyway. And why not have a more permissive tolerance of lot lines where there's, you know, there's no residence. And give a break to the people.
So in your meeting minutes, or your meeting agenda, you provided, if I'm not mistaken, the Rand Acoustics.
Yes, that was
Study.
provided by Mr. Martis.
That's right.
Yes.
And there's an ANSI standard that talks about what the noise level should be. And I'm in agreement with Ivan that you can have two different levels, but I don't agree with the level that you provided. So it should be 40 and 30, not 50 and 45.
Well, 30 is equivalent to a whisper.
It's not a case of what's equivalent to, it's a case of what's the right level for living amongst noise.
Well, a babbling brook is 40.
Listen, I'm not gonna, this is a point where this conversation is gonna take a long time with me, because I don't agree. You've got an ANSI standard here and you don't wanna use it. You wanna arbitrarily debate values that I don't agree with.
What was the sound ordinance that ran cited with an ANSI standard? I guess the question that I have is, what exactly was that ANSI standard promulgated for?
Let me see if I can, if that's part of the letter. I believe it is, but I don't know if I can. Environmental noise for land use can be formally assessed in ANSI standard S 12.9, parts 4 and 5. So my suggestion was that we table the conversation, we go back and we read this standard, and we look at it. So the lawyer told us, and he advised us that use a standard, don't arbitrarily come up with a number. And here you provided an ANSI standard, and I really recommend you look at it and you use it.
And I agree that we need to look at that, but I think we also need to use some common sense. So looking at noise levels,
Well,
like a babbling brook.
I don't agree with that. This is where the point that one of your residents out here made is you're taking agricultural land and you're making it some other use. And you're creating noises that are not normally part of the landscape. And you just can't compare a abandoned brook.
You're running a tractor or a combine, you tell me you don't make noise.
I'm not saying that things don't make noise,
Yeah, I
but
know.
what I'm trying to say to you is that you're changing the landscape and you're creating a new noise. I don't know if any of you ever worked around inverters, but they make a whining noise that becomes irritable after time.
Yeah, we were in Bowling Green for several hours.
Then if they don't make no noise, then meeting a 40 and 30 dB standard shouldn't be a problem. That would be my challenge to you, Jim. If they don't make any noise, then why are we arguing over it?
I don't know what 40 or 30 is.
40 and 30 is what's designated in this ANSI standard.
The question that I have.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the letter's part of the agenda.
I just wanted to add some more context to the discussion that the current ordinance only has noise level limitations for two kinds of special uses. And one of them is extractive industries, so that's like sand mining and gravel mining. And the limit, which is when abutting a residential district, is 75. The limit for wind is 55. So those are the only two places currently where the township regulates noise in any area.
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, my name is Kevin Barrett. I'm from Green Township, and I personally live around these things, so I can tell you, I will rebuttal what this gentleman said about, he said a minute ago that they move every 5 minutes. They do not move every 5 minutes. They move every minute and 50 seconds for 10 seconds at a time. They are 500 feet to 800 feet from the back of my property line or my neighbor's sides way over there. We both have 10 acres. Anywhere from 500 feet to 800 feet, you can hear these things move every minute and 50 seconds, and they hum every time. So it's not a whisper like they say it can be.
Okay. And is there a downtime where they're not moving?
When we're sleeping at midnight,
Okay, so they move until
they move
midnight?
all day long. Once
When do they stop?
they're fully charged, they set flat, and then by the morning time, they're back here, and then they start moving all day long, just like this to follow the sun.
Okay,
And you hear them all day.
and when do they stop?
When it's basically the sun's down, and then
When the
it's
sun's down?
fully charged.
Okay.
You do hear them. You can be sitting on your back deck and think you're gonna have a nice peaceful night with your family, and next thing you know, no, here you go again, every night, nonstop, like clockwork.
Which project is that?
Whichever one was just put in Raisin Township on Hendershot Highway.
Where at?
Hendershot Highway. Hendershot Highway. So if you wanna come sit in my back porch, you're more than welcome to my back porch.
We would.
Yeah.
I'll invite you to that.
If you got a beer.
All right. All right, at this point, it's 4:09, let's go ahead. Let's decide when we're gonna meet. We'll reconvene with the noise levels. We got through the setbacks and the solar panel fights tonight. I'm pleased. Next time, we're gonna do noise levels, landscape drainage. I think the rest of this stuff may go fast. So we're trying to do this one. Yes. Okay. Keep it quiet just a little longer.
Can you tell them the township if we're going in on their landscaping parking sport?
Diane, did you decide when the next meeting is?
No, hang on just a minute. Okay, let's look at the next meeting.